Hello everybody, my name is Eleanor Csizmadia and I have been following the Iditarod Trail sled dog race for over 15 years. I have attended the race twice, once in 2013 and once in 2017, and in just over 3 weeks I am going to be attending the 2022 Iditarod race. Tonight, welcome to Iditarod Trail Talks. We are going to talk about the who's, what's, when's, where's, why, and how's of the race. We're going to learn everything there is to know about it. It begins the first Saturday of March every year. And you've heard me say the name all the time. What is the Iditarod? It is a 1,049-mile dog sled race across the state of Alaska from Anchorage all the way to Nome, which is on the Bering Sea coast in the western part of the state. Nowadays, the mileage varies a little bit. It's closer to 978 miles. The city of Anchorage has expanded, so they kind of changed the race route just a little bit as the years have gone on, and sometimes weather can affect that, but we're definitely going to get into that. Oh, we will get into that. But 1,049 is significant in the state of Alaska because they are very proud to say that they are the 49th state. It was purchased from Russia in 1867. The name comes from the native word Alyeska, which means the Great Land. It's also a ski resort in Girdwood, Alaska, which I highly recommend. They have beautiful views and wonderful food. And when they say that Anchorage is their largest city, even though it's not their capital city, that's Juneau, Anchorage is still only relatively about the size of Columbus, Ohio. But in Alaska, that's pretty huge. Alaska is very sparsely populated. It's not dense at all. People are all over the state. People live out in the bush of Alaska. There's a lot of real estate out there that, hey, you can get real estate for cheap, but you're probably going to have to go without plumbing or electricity way out in the Alaskan bush. So often when they say a city's population is so-and-so, it will also include the people who live in the surrounding areas. Some of the features of Alaska include the Alaska Pipeline, which I went to in 2013, Denali National Park. I love the train ride. I highly recommend if you go to Alaska, if you go to the interior, take the train between Fairbanks and Anchorage. It's beautiful, it's scenic, and the train only goes about 35 miles an hour, so you can get all the pictures you want. And I took my husband on a twilight photography tour where we got that shot of downtown Anchorage. It was probably about -10 degrees when we took that picture, maybe colder. But of course, whenever people ask me about my trip to Alaska, they ask, did I see the northern lights? Yes, I did. These pictures were taken on a mountaintop in Chena Hot Springs, which is outside of Fairbanks, Alaska. When these pictures were taken, it was -25 degrees. And let me tell you, Chena Hot Springs is pretty cool. I didn't know this, but the hot springs aren't just for relaxation. They supply the water source for the entire resort. So when I used the restroom, it was a self-heating toilet, so that was really interesting, one of the more unique features of Alaska. Where did the Iditarod come from? It is actually a ghost town in the very middle of the race, but the trail itself is historic, not because of dog sledding per se, but it was used as a mail and gold route throughout the gold rush. And it actually stretches as far south as Seward, Alaska, which is south of Anchorage and where a lot of cruise ships go. I think that's the farthest north that most of them go. But it does stretch all the way up to Nome, Alaska, which is where the race ends every year. And Nome is really important because of one of the stories that inspired this race, called the Serum Run. In 1925, Nome, Alaska, way at the end of the Iditarod Trail, they had an outbreak of diphtheria. Children were dying of this disease, and the only medicine that they had in Nome was expired. And to top it off, there was a really bad storm coming in, and they didn't know how they were going to get the medicine in, because back then the only airplanes that were in existence had open cockpits, so the pilots would freeze to death, or the fuel, I don't know how the fuel was in those planes back then. The nearest train station to Nome was 700 miles away, and it was in January. So you couldn't depend on ships to break through the ice at that time of year. By that point, the ice is feet thick. So what was the solution? Well, they decided on dog sled. The only problem was it was still kind of a gamble, because in order to get from Nenana, where the train station was, to Nome, the average time it took to travel that by dog sled was 5 weeks. And people's lives were at stake. But they decided that was what they were going to do, so on January 27th at 11:30 p.m., a man named Wild Bill Shannon took off with his dog team and his lead dog Blackie from the train station in Nenana and took the medicine. The plan was, at that point, Wild Bill Shannon was going to take the medicine to the next village over, where another musher was going to be waiting for him. He would take the medicine to the next village, where there would be someone waiting for him, so on and so forth. There were 20 teams set up to start this. But originally, that wasn't the plan. Originally, the plan was one team was going to start in Nome, one was going to start in Nenana. They would meet in the middle, and then they would turn around and go back to their homes. And the musher who was chosen from Nome to be a part of that was named Leonard Csizmadia. And of course, I'm a good planner. I like to think I'm a good planner, even with tonight. But Leonard Csizmadia left Nome with that two teams plan. And only after he left did they decide, you know what, we're going to split this up into 20 teams. So while he was out on the trail, they made this decision. So he thought he was going halfway between Nome and Nenana to this town called New Lotto. And a man named Henry Ivanov had the medicine and was told, hey, you got to find Leonard Csizmadia out on the trail in this blizzard where you can't even see your hand in front of your face. Somehow, by some beautiful stroke of luck, he saw Leonard Csizmadia coming towards him with his team. Leonard Csizmadia had his lead dog, Togo, and Henry started waving his arms. The serum, I have the serum. Luckily, Leonard Csizmadia saw him and stopped. And probably would not have happened if not for his lead dog, Togo. Now, he and Togo had this amazing bond. People would say that Leonard Csizmadia almost had an ESP-like relationship with Togo. They always kind of knew what the other needed. Togo had some kind of intuition that Leonard Csizmadia couldn't really explain. He was an amazing racing dog. He was 12 years old, I believe, at the time of the serum run. He wasn't young, but boy, Togo's dedication to Leonard Csizmadia was massive. So Leonard decided, you know what? For something as big as this, saving a whole town of people where we live, where his daughter was sick, he knew Togo could be trusted. So they even crossed the Norton Sound to cut time. So you have to cross the water. Frozen ice water is still dangerous at that time of year. At one point, Togo was on one ice floe, and then the ice started to crack. And the team was separated from Togo, but Togo pulled on the harness so hard that he brought the two ice floes together, and they were able to cross safely. And Togo and Leonard Csizmadia ended up carrying the medicine the farthest of any team in this relay. They call it the relay for the Mercy relay. They carried it 90 miles, farther than any other team. So that being said, Leonard Csizmadia thought, hey, Togo's going to come home to a wonderful welcome home party. He's going to be celebrated. He's going to be hailed as a hero. Well, Togo caught scent of a fox on their way back into Nome, and he ran off to chase the fox. So he missed his own homecoming party. So poor Togo. But nowadays, you can see he has a brand new statue in New York City. I haven't seen it yet. I really want to see it because, as we're about to learn, Togo didn't really receive the praise that a lot of people back then and even today believe that he deserved. So Leonard Csizmadia passed off the medicine to a man named Charlie Olson, and Charlie Olson passed it off to a man named Gunnar Kasson. Gunnar Kasson was actually a friend of Leonard Csizmadia's, and he was borrowing some of Leonard Csizmadia's dogs, including his dog Balto. Now Balto was used more as a freight dog, more on the shipyards pulling barrels and that kind of stuff. He was kind of stubby legs, not that tall, kind of bulky for a sled dog. So that's why he was used more as a working dog than a racing dog. But for some reason, this night, Gunnar Kasson decided he had a good feeling about Balto. So he put him in the lead and took off into the night, off to Point Safety, which was their intended goal. And it turns out Gunnar Kasson's intuition about Balto was right. Balto could see when Gunnar Kasson couldn't. The storm was really bad, and the stretch of trail they went along is along the coast of the Norton Sound. It's basically on the beach. And even mushers in the Iditarod today will tell you the weather there is really unpredictable. At one point, the wind knocked the sled all the way over, and all the dogs freaked out, except for Balto. Balto kept calm, and he calmed the other dogs down while Gunnar Kasson had to dig in the snow to find the medicine. The medicine went missing for a couple of minutes in the dark in a big snowbank. It was really scary. But he was able to find it, and they went on their way to Point Safety. But when they reached Point Safety, it was dark. And it was either because Gunnar Kasson didn't notice that they were in point safety because it was so dark and the storm was so bad, or the musher, but either way, the musher wasn't ready. The musher was asleep. His name was Ed Rohn. He was asleep. This was the last stop before Nome. And the musher was asleep. There are people's lives at stake. So Gunnar Kasson kept on going into the night. There was absolutely no time to waste. So they arrived next morning, February 2nd at 5:30 in the morning. Now remember what I said about this trail taking 5 weeks to cover? This was covered in 5.5 days. 5.5 days across the whole state of Alaska, across 700 miles, 19 teams. And because Gunnar Kasson and Balto brought the medicine directly to the hospital and to those children, they were immediately celebrities. The newspapers down in this part of the country were covering this whole thing while the dogs were out on the trail. So people immediately wanted to see these celebrity dogs. But Togo wasn't included in this. And Leonard Seppala wasn't entirely bitter. He didn't live his life as jaded. But he was a little disappointed that Togo didn't get the recognition that Balto did, even though Togo went farther than Balto did. Balto only carried the medicine 54 miles. But either way, Balto and Togo got their own separate tours of the lower 48. Leonard Seppala took Togo out on his own dime just to make sure that people remembered Togo, the hero dog. Balto and his teammates got a whole public tour of the lower 48, and he even got the key to the city of Los Angeles in the shape of a dog bone, which was pretty cool. And his statue in New York City was erected in Central Park. But while Togo got to go home to live out the rest of his life in a peaceful retirement with Leonard Seppala, Balto and his teammates were sold to a vaudeville circus in downtown Los Angeles, where they were kept in a stuffy back room where people would pay a dime or a nickel to walk past them and see them through glass pane, and that was it. They were underfed, they weren't exercised. This room was really hot and stuffy. These dogs were used to sub-zero temperatures. They were not treated well at all for hero dogs. And that's what a businessman named George Kimball thought when he came by and he saw these hero dogs he read about in the paper. And so he went to the circus owner and asked, "How much for these dogs?" And when he was told $2,000, this was in 1927. That's a lot of money. So he came back home to Cleveland, here. And he told everybody, "Hey, remember those hero dogs from the newspapers? They need our help. We need to raise the money to save them." So children donated their milk money. Everybody here came together and they raised the money in less than 2 weeks, which was the deadline given to George Kimball. And then they came here to live out the rest of their lives at our zoo. Balto died of old age in 1933. You can see him today at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. He was stuffed and mounted here because we saved him. Every once in a while, Alaska says they want him back, but now, we raised the money, we saved him. I think we deserve him. I work at UH Main campus, right across the street from him, and I think it's awesome that I get to drive by the museum every day and, pay a little bit of homage to Balto and, wave at the museum just a little bit. Balto has statues all over the country. He's got a bunch of statues in Alaska, in Central Park, obviously, and at our own zoo since he lived there. If you go through the wolf exhibit, through the wolf cabin, you go through the back door past the beavers and the bald eagles. That last picture you saw of me, that's at the Wolf Lodge at Cleveland Metro Park Zoo. This picture here is a statue of Balto that marks the starting line of the Iditarod every year. So Balto is all over this race. But again, we want to make sure that Togo is recognized at the same time. If you want to learn more about Togo, there is an extremely accurate depiction of his story starring Willem Dafoe on Disney+. The movie is appropriately called Togo. So decades passed after Balto and Togo and Leonard and Gunnar and all that. And with the changing times, a man named Joe Reddington Sr. noticed that dog sleds were disappearing from Alaska. They were being replaced by planes and snowmobiles, and they weren't really essential for survival in Alaska anymore, but people just weren't using them anymore. And he thought that was a shame because he thinks that sled dogs were essential for creating the state of Alaska. That is how it was settled. That's how people lived for centuries before all this new technology came. So he and Dorothy Page came together to decide that sled dog races were going to be a landmark of Alaska. It was going to cement a part of Alaskan history and cement the history of the relationship between man and dog that honestly you can't get any other way than this. So, first rule they came up with, this race will start the first Saturday of March every year. The first race was held in 1973 and it took 3 weeks to get a winner. Our first champion was Dick Wilmarth. I believe he passed away a couple years ago. But this is the race we have now. It is now called the last great race on earth. In just over 3 weeks, I will be going to that first Saturday of March on 4th Avenue in downtown Anchorage for basically the coolest tailgate party ever. And then the next day will be the official restart. The race actually gets 2 starting lines. So let's take a look at what the starting line in Anchorage is going to look like, give you a taste of what I'm going to experience next month. So that is what it looks like on Saturday morning. I'm so excited. There's so many people there. People from around the world come to see the ceremonial start. There's not just hot dog carts, there's reindeer sausage carts. And that's actually pretty good. I asked my husband to go get some while I held our spot. He came back, said, "Where's your sausage?" He said, "I ate it already." I said, "Well, was it good? Did you like it?" He said, "Let's just say Santa better watch out where he's flying from now on." So, where are they going? All right. It is 2022. They alternate routes on even years and odd years. So this year, this is what the map is going to look like. Anchorage is way down here, and it is kind of in the central part of the state. There's the Panhandle way out in this area. Alaska is, I think, at least twice the size of Texas. Well, maybe not twice the size, 1.5 times the size of Texas. I think a friend of mine and I figured out that you can fit Britain and Alaska 8 times, at least. So they start from Anchorage at the ceremonial start. The next day, they're going to go out to a frozen lake in Willow. Anchorage is more or less a parade on the first Saturday. So everybody kind of stays in order. It's for the sponsors, it's for the fans, it's for fun. But once we go up to Willow the next day, everybody's going to get one last night of good sleep, show up on a frozen lake in Willow, and they're going to head out northwest. These early checkpoints here, Yentna, Squentna, Finger Lake, just kind of easing into the race, little rolling hills. But then once you get past Finger Lake and work your way up, all the way up through Nikolai to McGrath, they're going through the Alaska Range. They're going through the mountains. After that, they're going to go through what is called the Farewell Burn, an area that was affected by wildfires in the 1970s. At Ophir, they're going to cut north to Cripple. And once you get up to Ruby there, they are on the Yukon River. And so is Galena, Nulato, Caltag. At this point, once you get to Ruby, they're actually crossing the same trail that the Serum Run back in 1925 crossed. Then across to Unalakleet there and Shaktoolik, and that's the area where Leonard Seppala found Henry Ivanhoff. And up to Koyuk. If you see between Shaktoolik and Koyuk, yes, they cross over the ice. They do have a trail breaker that kind of scouts out the trail ahead of them. You can follow them on the GPS tracker if you decide to follow the race. Then Elim and Gullivan and White Mountain, Point Safety and Nome are all along the Bering Sea coast where Gunnar Kasson and his team traveled. And again, the weather is a little dicey there. So each stretch of trail is very unique and it has its own, I don't want to say hazards, but own challenges. Yeah, challenges. So that's what it's going to look like this year. On odd years, next year, God willing, with no virus interrupting that, we're going to show you what last year's trail looked like. So different. So it kind of looks the same for next year's race, starting in Anchorage on Saturday, then Willow on Sunday, Yentna, Squentna, Finger Lake, all the way up to Ophir after the Alaska Range. But if you remember, even years after Ophir, they cut north. On odd years, they're going to cut south to Iditarod. It's a ghost town that is only occupied during the race. A lot of these checkpoints are only occupied during the race. Some of them are just little hunting stands out in the middle of nowhere. I think that's what Roan is. It's about the size. It's a little hut that's about the size of an outhouse or two. And once you get to Iditarod, you go to Shagaluk and Grayling. And a lot of these checkpoints are actually, even though some of them are just outposts in the middle of nowhere, some of these like McGrath, Takotna, Ophir, Shagaluk, Caltag, Unalakleet, They're occupied villages. People live there year round. And people are so hospitable during the race. If you stop in Takatna for a while as a musher, you're going to get a pie or two. They are probably already preparing for all the baking that they do for the mushers. They're very hospitable. And then Shaktoolik and Koyuk. So once you get back up to Kaltag on the Yukon River, the race looks the same after that along the Bering Sea coast. But every once in a while, the weather kind of interrupts things a little bit. I remember a couple of years back in this area around Shagaluk and Grayling and Eagle Island, there was a lot of rain, a lot of standing water on the trail. But how about the years when there's no snow? What happens then? Well, it looks like this. I apologize, this is the race's official map for 2015 and 2017. If you look really closely here, there's a light blue line. But what's missing from this map? There's no anchorage in this map. Yes, I was at the race in 2017. They had the ceremonial start, but you remember I mentioned the Alaska Range? That part of the trail in the mountain ranges had no snow in 2015 and 2017. So they moved the whole race up to Fairbanks. This is Fairbanks. So I had to miss the official restart in 2017. I watched it from the mall food court that year, even though I was in Alaska, but at least I was warm. I think it was negative 25 when they set out from that starting line. But this was to avoid any injuries or any bad things from happening in the Alaska Range, because you kind of need snow in order to properly drive a dog sled and keep the dogs safe. So they started here in Fairbanks and worked their way down the Tanana River to Nenana, which is where Wild Bill Shannon picked up the medicine in 1925. They followed the Tanana River, and all the way over here, that's Ruby, which is a normal stop on the trail. And once they got there, it was kind of normal, except if you look in the middle there, they cut north to a little village called Huslia. Huslia was so excited to host the race. It's all native, it's a native community. They were very happy to bring their native heritage to join with the dog sledding heritage as it is today, and it was so cool. I think they won an award for their hospitality. After Huslia, they cut back down to the Yukon River and joined the race trail as it usually is with Galena, Kaltag, and Unalakleet, and all the way over to Nome on the Bering Sea coast. But weather isn't the only thing that affects the trail. 2020, the same week that the virus hit the United States, the teams were already out on the trail. It was kind of a mess. So by the time people came home, the champion of 2020, he was from Norway. He didn't get home until June because all the airports shut down. The only reason he got home was because he found out there was a World War II plane being donated from Fairbanks to a museum in Norway. And he got to hitchhike onto an old World War II airplane, and his wife was terrified because it just had the propellers on the wings, and she's like, "You're gonna fly on that all the way home?" But he made it. But that was kind of a mess. So 2021, they were a little more prepared, and they changed the entire race. So on 2021, it was an odd year, but they changed it a little bit. If you look really closely, you'll see this red dotted line over the typical green line. This is what they call the Gold Trail Loop. So what they did last year was, for one thing, all these stops, all these checkpoints were moved out of the villages, about a mile or two outside the villages. Their concern was if you live out in the middle of Alaska, you don't have easy access to healthcare. They wanted to protect the villagers. So the checkpoints were moved a little bit outside the villages. Only volunteers and Iditarod race officials could have contact with the mushers. And they followed this red dotted line all the way out to the halfway point of Iditarod, at which point teams turned around. So in Willow, the starting line was not just the starting line, it was the finish line. The first time the Iditarod Trail Sled Dog Race did not end in Nome. It was bittersweet. A lot of people were just happy we had a race at all. It was really exciting though, because we had never seen it before where teams were coming at each other head on. So mushers had to train their dogs on, how to stay calm, how to keep focused when, hey, you got more dog teams coming at you. You can't get all excited and say, "Oh, more friends, we can play with our friends." No, you gotta keep racing, you gotta keep your head in the game. So there were new challenges added to last year's race for the people and the dogs. But I think it went off without a hitch pretty much. I don't think anybody got COVID. They have a lot of contact precautions for that. And I think Takatna was still able to provide pies. I remember I sat and watched the live feed in Squentna which is back here. On the way back, I sat and watched one musher sit for 20 minutes past his cutoff time for his mandatory rest, waiting for banana bread. That's how addicted to the live stream I get, I know. So it's hard for me to really describe and get you guys to understand what the trail looks like in between the starting line and the finish line, because it's so remote. And when I go up there next month, I'm only going to the starting line because, you know, Anchorage is very accessible, but the Alaskan bush isn't. So let's take a look at some of the official pictures that I am borrowing from the amazing Jeff Schultz. The top left picture, that's what it looks like coming into the Alaska range. They are mountainous, rocky peaks. At one point, you are going down into a gorge, into the Happy River, and they have what are called the Happy River steps. You're going down the side of the gorge, you're going along, everything's fine and dandy, the trail's even, and all of a sudden, whoop, almost a 90-degree drop. That's why they call them the Happy River steps, and it happens 3 times. It's kind of a wild ride for the mushers. The dogs love it. They love the feeling of just being able to run free and down the hill while the musher is holding on for dear life. And yes, sleds crash there all the time. So that's why they had to move the race in 2015 and 17, because that would have been a hazard with no snow. Top right picture, that is Unakleet, one of the villages. This one is on the Bering Sea coast. First team who reaches Unakleet on the Bering Sea coast actually gets a prize, the Gold Coast Award. There's some fun prizes along the trail. Bottom left picture, that's what it looks like coming off the Yukon River. It's kind of down a slope. The river itself is about half a mile wide. So they share this trail with the natives who are using their snowmobiles year-round, and they use it for fishing on the river, ice fishing. But they share the trail very well. So it's not that difficult to share the river with it being that wide. And then the picture on the bottom right, that's the Farewell Burn. I just love how it looks, the trail carving that clear path in between all those trees into the mountains. This is the kind of stuff that really showcases Alaska. Remember, this race is for the history of Alaska, and it can really show off what Alaska has to offer in the ways of nature. So I've mentioned a lot what it looks like without snow. This video was taken in 2014, which was a year they probably should have moved the race to. We're just going to watch a little bit because it is going to be a little dizzying. This is 4-time champion Jeff King's experience running through Rainy Pass in the Alaska Range in 2014.
So this is the mouth of Rainy Pass. It's about 5 miles from here up to the very top where we drop over into the Dodell Gorge. Dogs are doing awesome. It's almost scary how fast they're going, and it worries me. All right.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy, but the trail typically looks pretty serene and quiet, and that year was kind of treacherous. There were a lot of broken sleds, a lot of broken bones on the mushers. The dogs were having a blast though. They thought, hey, is this something different? No snow? We can handle this. So day 1 of the race, what am I going to be seeing? Every team is going to start with 14 dogs. As of a couple years ago, it's 14, but before that, they were allowed to start with 16, but the veterinarians thought 14 was a little bit more manageable for the mushers. That way they can just help them keep better care of their dogs. Not that mushers can't take care of their dogs. Mushers have to be their dogs' veterinarians along the trail, but again, there are veterinarians at every single checkpoint, but 14 sounds a little bit more manageable. The dogs, as we learned in the introductory video, are not Siberian Huskies typically. Every once in a while you see a team with all Siberians. Mushers will do that for historical value or aesthetic, but typically they use Alaskan Huskies. They are not a registered breed with the American Kennel Club. They're a mixed breed, and it depends on what the musher wants in their sled dogs. If they want more enthusiasm, they'll add a little bit of lab. If they want certain physical attributes, they'll choose maybe pointer or greyhound. I know I spoke with Martin Boozer, a 4-time champion. He likes adding greyhound because the greyhounds have that kind of curved backside, and their back legs are very springy, so they can get more out of a stride that way. Or sometimes you might add some more Malamute if you want strength and stamina and that kind of stuff. But either way, the mushers all choose their dog's breeding program by themselves. It's very common for mushers to share dogs and interchange their breeding programs. And some people will say, oh yeah, well, I have some Boozer dogs, I have some Butcher dogs, I have some King dogs. It's all about the dogs. So it's very common for mushers to, trade dogs and include each other's breeding in their own breeding programs. Dogs look skinny. I've gotten this a lot. Like, why do the dogs look so skinny? These dogs are athletes. You wouldn't expect Michael Phelps to look too muscular. Michael Phelps is an athlete. He has to be fast in the water. He has to be fit so he doesn't, get tired. But, if you have a person or an animal who's too big and muscular, they're not going to move as well. So these dogs are fit. Their metabolism has evolved and changed with their breeding. The mushers see to it that the dogs are exercised year-round. They train year-round. So these dogs are athletes. But if a dog doesn't want to run, they don't have to. It is in their DNA. They want to run. But every once in a while, you do have a sled dog that doesn't want to run, or just a puppy that just is uninterested. They make amazing house pets. And sometimes they can hang around after they retire to motivate the new puppies. But along the trail, dogs can sometimes get uninterested or injured, and that happens, in every race. So there are veterinarians at every single checkpoint ready to take care of the dogs that are sick or injured. And once they are good enough to travel, they are sent back to Anchorage to receive more veterinary care if they need it, or if they're just tired or uninterested. And once they're healthy, they're actually part of a women's prison program, and they receive all the tender loving care from the prisoners for some of their rehabilitation, and they're well taken care of until their musher can come pick them up. But sometimes things happen on the trail and a dog just loses interest. There was one year, 2019, I picked this guy named Nick Petit to win. And he reached a part of the trail out where Leonard Seppel and Togo were, out on the ice. And he had gotten lost in that part of the trail the year before, and there was a storm. And his dogs kind of remembered this. They were already kind of like, oh yeah, Dad was scared, we were scared, we remember this place. And then one of his dogs decided he wanted to stop to answer nature's call. Well, the dog behind him didn't like that idea, so they started fighting. So I don't have dogs, I have cats. But as a pet parent, I know every once in a while when my pets start fighting, I do exactly what Nick did, which is snap just a little bit, go, hey, knock it off. Well, it wasn't just those two dogs who heard him. All his dogs heard him, and all of them stopped, as if to say, we don't like your tone. We're not going anywhere. And they sat there for 12 hours. Nick let them sleep. He fed them. He took them for walks one at a time. He took them 2 at a time, ran them around in circles. They just checked out mentally. They were just, we're done. We didn't like how you talked to us. We're done. So Nick had to drop out. That's what I get for picking him. I picked him the year he got lost. I picked him the year the dogs quit on him. My husband calls it a puppy temper tantrum. So it was definitely unusual. So in my videos from Anchorage, did you notice sometimes there was more than one person on the sled? Those are Iditariders. The bidding ended about a week and a half ago, but since Saturday, the ceremonial start is just an 11-mile parade. You could bid money to ride in one of the sleds. And it costs a few $1,000s, especially if you want to ride in the sled of a former champion. But it's one of the many fundraisers, since Saturday is for the sponsors, it's for the fans. It is an opportunity for fundraising. The Iditarod Trail Committee is a nonprofit, so all the money goes towards them and their efforts to further dog care in the race. How a musher does, again, in Anchorage on day 1 has no bearing on the race. It's just a parade. It's just fun. Everybody stays in order and just, has fun waving to the fans. The dogs get a little bit of stimulation, and attention before they go out in the middle of nowhere and the only human around is their musher. Saturday was just for show, but let me tell you, it is a fun show. The race restarts the next day, the official restart in Willow, Alaska. Just like Saturday, they're going to start one team at a time every 2 minutes. The Thursday before the race starts, they're going to have this big gala event, which I am attending. And every musher will draw their starting position number out of a mukluk boot. It is a really good time. When there's no virus, I've gone around and gotten autographs and pictures, but because of COVID, there's not going to be any opportunity for pictures and autographs this year. Too bad. But in the race, on both Saturday and Sunday, dogs are wearing booties on their paws to keep ice from packing in between their pads, because if ice and snow pack in there, it can freeze and cut their pads and lead to injury or infection, and we just don't want that. We want happy, healthy dogs in a race that celebrates happy, healthy dogs who love to run. That's what it looks like out on the frozen lake. People actually bring in their own grills, and it's another tailgating party, but one that's a little farther out there. I think it's cooler than the municipal lot. Teams are required to take a 24-hour break and 2 8-hour breaks. The 24-hour break has to be taken at a designated checkpoint, which are all those towns and stops you saw on the maps back there. When you start the race, obviously, if there's one team at a time, there's 15 teams in the race this year. So that means the team who leaves first from the starting line has an hour-and-a-half lead over the one who starts last. So your difference of time between you and the last person who left the starting line will be added to the 24-hour break. Then an 8-hour break must be taken at another checkpoint along the Yukon River. The musher gets to decide where and when. And then another 8-hour break is required at White Mountain, which is the second to last checkpoint. And one of those other stories about dogs just deciding they didn't want to go, what took place in White Mountain. One of my favorite mushers, Brent Sass, he tried to get his dogs to leave after their 8-hour break. He was in third place. He was excited, like, oh, this is going to be my best finish. But his dogs were just too tired, and he realized, I pushed them too hard. So you know what, guys? You call the shots. We're going to wait for you to finish. He ended up getting 20th place instead of third. And he said, you know what? I pushed my dogs too hard. I broke their trust. This is all my fault. I need to win their trust back. And he ended up taking a couple years off to reevaluate his racing program, reevaluate his own motivations. When he came back, he ended up winning another 1,000-mile race called the Yukon Quest twice. And he got third place in last year's Iditarod. So I think him taking a break was all for the best. He's actually out there right now racing the Yukon Quest, which is only 500 miles right now because of the virus, but yeah, he's out there right now, so best of luck to Brent. But the checkpoints, they come in many different forms. Some of them are school gyms, some of them are firehouses, or sometimes they're just a campsite that the volunteers set up in the days leading up to the race. Mushers are very able to camp out. They're very used to that. A lot of them will actually break and in between checkpoints. You can rest at a checkpoint for however long you want. You have to stop at every checkpoint, get a veterinary check at every checkpoint. And beyond that, you can stay as long or as short time as you want. Some mushers will just blow through, just sign on the clipboard that they were there, say, hey, give me my food, I'm heading out. And then 2 miles later, you see, oh, they stopped on the trail. They're letting their dogs take a nap out at their own little campsite. It's about an average of 20, 50 miles between checkpoints. I think the longest distance between checkpoints is somewhere around 80 miles, but the average is a lot shorter than that. And yes, I get this question a lot. Do they run all night? Yes, they do. This is a race. Back in the gold rush days, the male days, they would run all night. The dogs sleep a lot more than the mushers do. The mushers have to care for their dogs, veterinary care. They have to cook for their dogs, look after their dogs' welfare. Sometimes they give them massages. So the dogs are sleeping while the musher is cooking and cleaning and picking up after their dogs. So the mushers get very little sleep while the dogs get all the rest, all the food they want. The mushers typically, I think one musher said he eats taquitos, those mini tacos from the frozen food section. So, the dogs are definitely getting better treatment than the people. The trail is marked kind of by yardstick looking posts in the snow with reflective tape on top. They are placed there by a trail breaker, which I mentioned earlier is somebody out on a snowmobile who is making sure that the trail is free of hazards and whatnot. You can even follow them on the GPS tracker. If you follow the race like I do, you get a GPS tracker, and every musher has a GPS tracker so you can see where everybody is at all times. It's really fun. Like I mentioned, teams are allowed to take breaks in between checkpoints. This is extremely common. Nick Petit, same guy whose dogs had that little temper tantrum, he prefers to rest in between checkpoints so he doesn't get interviews. He doesn't like talking to people. Mushers are very used to living out in the middle of nowhere, especially aforementioned Brent Sass. He lives way out there outside of Fairbanks, and he's not used to crowds. So sometimes mushers who aren't used to crowds will prefer to camp out. If a musher is going to rest in between checkpoints, they're going to ask for straw to bed their dogs. They can make a very cozy bed for their dogs out of straw. They love it. And they will ask for their food. In the next couple weeks, there is going to be what is called Food Drop Day. And that is when the mushers are going to show up at an airport in Anchorage with about a couple dozen bags of food with their name on it and what each checkpoint on it, each bag. So they have their name and checkpoint numbers, checkpoint name on the bag, and they're going to be flown to those designated checkpoints. So when they arrive at a checkpoint, all they have to say is, hey, my food is here, can I have it? And then the volunteer goes, oh, there's your name, it's at the right checkpoint, all right, here's your food, you're good to go. So they don't have to carry hundreds and hundreds of pounds of dog food throughout the entire race. So that's really handy. An award is given to the musher who takes the best care of their dogs. This is voted on by the veterinarians at the end of the race. All the veterinarians in the Iditarod are volunteers. If you are a veterinarian and you would like to volunteer, get in line now and you might be able to volunteer for the 2025 or 26 race, because the race volunteer list is very long and it's a very high demand volunteer position. The dogs eat thousands of calories in those big food drop bags, equivalent to 50 Big Macs during a race. When they're not racing and they're just training or they're hanging out at home, it's closer to 10,000 calories, but when they're racing, their metabolism that I mentioned, or that they mentioned in the video, their metabolism is built for this. They have to keep, the musher's job is to keep up with their metabolism. They give them a lot of lean meats. Basically, the dogs are eating Kobe beef out there, and again, mushers are eating taquitos from the frozen food section. Mushers will sometimes make a soup kind of thing with kibble or ant mixed in with caribou or reindeer or fish. There's a lot of fish. For a quick snack, frozen fish is a great option if you just want to stop your team. Don't want to stay too long in one spot, and they hand out pieces of frozen beef or frozen fish, and the dogs can gnaw on that. Plenty of calories and protein in that. Some mushers will massage their dogs while they're resting. I've seen Dee Dee John Road do it. Again, mushers have to be their dog's advocate. They have to be their veterinarian when there is no one out there between the checkpoints. I know Mitch Seavey uses essential oils. Everybody has their different methods of dog care, because let's face it, the dogs are the athletes here. They need to be taken care of. If your dogs aren't taken care of, if they're not in a good mood, if they're not satisfied, if they're not happy, if they're not feeling good, a musher's not going anywhere. So these mushers have to be in tune with their dog's needs at all time. They have to be true dog people. And that's the only way to have real success in this race, is to know your dogs. Dallas Seavey has won this race 5 times, and he said the best chance of success is if everything goes right for you. And this race is a giant chess game, so you never know if things are going to go right every single time. It's not just about speed out there. Martin Boozer held a fastest win time record for years with more rest than running. It's all about how you ration out your rest time in relation to your running time. It's not just about speed. Where you take your 24-hour break can make or break your race. Where you take your 8-hour break can make or break a race. How long you took to rest in between checkpoints, that can mean the difference between winning and losing. I think that was how Dallas Seavey won in 2012, because he snuck out, he went out of a checkpoint and everybody thought he was going to keep running, but turns out he went right to the edge of where the lights were and camped out there. So the people right behind him thought, I'm not going to be able to catch him, I'm going to stay at the checkpoint. Well, they probably could have passed him. So it's all about the timing everything out. But in 2008, it came down to a sneaky move, which I named my cat after. In 2008, you have the current champion, Lance Mackey, and the 2006 champion, Jeff King, neck and neck the entire time. Because what Jeff was doing, he was staying right behind Lance and copying everything Lance did. If Lance stopped to feed his dogs, Jeff stopped to feed his dogs. If Lance took a 5-hour break, Jeff took a 5-hour break. You stayed right behind Lance so that the last second, if Lance let his guard down, Jeff could pass him. So Lance knew he had to do something to shake Jeff off his tail. So what he did was he pulled into the village of Elam, which is the third to last stop, and he went inside and got down on the floor to lie down, and Jeff's like, thank goodness. He hasn't stopped in like over a day. He hasn't slept in 2 or 3 days, which means I haven't slept in 2 or 3 days. So he saw Lance lie down, so Jeff goes inside the shelter after he feeds his dogs, goes up against the wall, puts his hat over his eyes. He was out like a light. Lance was faking. Lance was not asleep. Lance snuck out and he scolded the camera guys like, hey, this is only going to work if you guys are quiet, so cut the lights. Jeff didn't wake up for 45 minutes, and there were other people in the shelter drinking coffee. He's like, where's Lance? He just knew something was wrong. And everybody in the room just went, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't see him. Jeff felt a little betrayed. He's like, these people were my friends. They couldn't even look me in the eye. Well, Lance ended up winning that year, and he went on to win 2 more after that. He got 4 wins in a row. So I named my cat Elam because he's sneaky like Lance was in Elam. If you win the race, you win $50,000 and a snowmobile, which is a big deal up in Alaska because they're the biggest form of transportation next to airplanes. Everybody in Alaska has has a pilot's license pretty much. Fastest win time was held by Mitch Seavey, 8 days, 3 hours, 40 minutes, and 13 seconds. Yes, I was at that race. I wasn't at the finish line to see that, but I was there at the beginning. It takes about 8 or 9 days to get a winner, so if it starts on Sunday, we'll probably get a winner on the following Tuesday, the next week. So I just had to turn in my work schedule for that, and I asked, Tuesday, I need Tuesday off so I can watch this. One of the fastest finishers wasn't even a winner. In 2014, Dallas Seavey passed Jeff King, who was about to win. I had set my alarm to watch, I'm going to watch Jeff King, he's going to win the race. Jeff King was probably about 5 hours from winning the race when he was on that stretch of trail that I mentioned on the Bering Sea coast on the beach where Gunnar Kasson had that big wind. Jeff got caught up in one of those, and he had to drop out of the race because it was a really bad storm. Dallas Seavey passed him in this, but didn't know he passed him. Couldn't see his hand in front of his face. So Dallas was coming up to the finish line, and everybody's cheering, and he thought, oh, I see a musher behind me. That must be my dad. We're racing for 3rd place. He thought 2 people were ahead of him. He thought, okay, cool. Dallas didn't know he won for about 30 seconds after he crossed the finish line. And then 2 minutes after Dallas crossed the finish line, Ali Zirkle came in for 2nd place. Dallas had just, what is the word? Why am I blanking? Dallas had just achieved one of the record times for a win. So since Ali came in only 2 minutes behind him, she was still in that window to qualify for one of the top 5 fastest finishes, even though she was 2nd place. So that was pretty cool. It was weird to wake up to, though. I turned on my GPS map, and Jeff King was completely gone. It was 4 in the morning. My husband will tell you I was crazy that day. Like, where's Jeff? There's no answers. Where's Jeff? Then Dallas crossed the finish line, and my coworker asked me, did your guy win? And I said, I have no idea what I just saw. It was very confusing. That storm was, whew. Sometimes winning is a family affair. There's a lot of fathers and sons that have won. Dick Mackey won in 1978, his son Rick in 1983. And Lance Mackey, the guy who faked being asleep, won in 2007, 8, 9, and 10. He also won the Yukon Quest, which is a 1,000-mile race in between Whitehorse, Yukon Territory, and Fairbanks, Alaska. It's the world's longest international dog sled race. He won that 4 years in a row, including 2 years that overlapped this, 2007 and 2008. He's probably one of the greatest the sport will ever see. Mitch Seavey won in 2004, 13, and 17. And why do those last 2 numbers sound familiar? Oh, yeah, I was at those. I was there in 2013 and 2017. Mitch Seavey hasn't won since. So I'm waiting for my my voucher ticket, because I already got my airplane ticket. But I was waiting for a free one so I can be Mitch's good luck charm again. Like, hello. His son Dallas won in 2012, 14, 15, 16, and is our current champion. He is returning to the race to defend his title. There's many mushers who have won 4 times. Susan Butcher, Martin Boozer, Doug Swingley, Jeff King, Lance Mackey, and Dallas Seavey finally made it out of the 4-timers club in 2021 by getting his 5th title. Up until then, Rick Swenson was the only one who won 5 times. He was the record holder for that. He won his 5th race in 1991. It was a 30-year jinx that Dallas Seavey broke. It was pretty impressive. So in the new year, this is me at that banquet, that gala event that's coming up the Thursday before the race. Every year is unique. The trail changes because of weather or viruses. 2014, with Dallas not knowing he won because of that storm, that proved anything can happen. No win is guaranteed. 2019 proved that anything can come in between a musher and winning the race. Nick was seriously in first place. Everybody thought he was going to win, but his dogs just decided, nah, we're not going to finish. Even last year, Dallas Seavey was in first place. He had 2 more checkpoints to go. And, you know, his dogs were laying down at the checkpoint on the straw. They were making beds for themselves. Well, there's some wild horses out in that area of Alaska. I didn't know there were wild horses. Apparently the horses were hungry. They didn't care that there were dogs sitting on the straw. They saw the straw and they started, Dallas almost got stampeded by wild horses. And I remember thinking, I thought I knew everything that could come between a musher and the finish line. I didn't know wild horses were included in that. Will controversy change people's attitudes about the race? There's still controversy over the idea that cell phones are allowed on the trail now. And that might hurt the authenticity of the race. It's supposed to be a time capsule. It's supposed to be our connection to history. And do cell phones hurt this? Will we have a 6-time champion? Will Dallas be the official, record-breaking champion this year? Or maybe it's time for another woman to win. We haven't seen a woman win since 1990. Of course, that was the year I was born, but I'm not a jinx. Or am I? Because Nick Petit had that bad luck when I picked him to win. I should probably stop picking people. Top contenders, the faces of the race. The people, like I said, the mushers will all attend this banquet on Thursday, which I will be at. Just, they won't be there. It's going to be virtual. And everybody's going to draw their starting position number out of a muckluck boot. Martin Boozer, 4-time champion and multiple Leonard Csizmadia Award winner. If you watch that movie Togo that I mentioned on Disney+, he was the musher on staff to be the consultant. If you watch the movie, if there's a close-up shot of a musher on a sled, that is Willem Dafoe as Leonard Csizmadia. But the long shots where the team is kind of off in the distance, that's actually Martin Boozer driving a dog team in the movie. So he's a movie star now. Nick Petit, poor guy, I need to stop picking him. He's often found in the top 10. He just hasn't won the Iditarod yet, but he is amazing at mid-distance races. Mid-distance races happen in January and February, pretty much every weekend. They range between 200 miles and 400 miles. Nick Petit has won a bunch of them. He actually came in 2nd place in the Willow 300 over the weekend, which was kind of an upset for me. He was supposed to compete in this year's Copper Basin, so the bottom is not accurate. Brent Sass is actually the current Copper Basin champion. Nick was supposed to compete, but his truck didn't start that morning, so he couldn't make it to the starting line. This guy has terrible luck, doesn't he? But he is amazing at mid-distance season, and he was very happy with his 7th place finish last year in the Iditarod because he said, my dogs got to relax a little bit, I got to relax a little bit, and even relaxing, we made top 10, so that's pretty good. Aaron Burmeister, 2nd place last year. He's usually in the top 5. He's interesting this year because he has a challenge for Dallas Seavey. Dallas Seavey did what a lot of mushers do, which is they take 1 or 2 dogs out of their team and put them in the sled to rest. And then they'll go a couple checkpoints or maybe just 20, 30 miles, and then they'll switch those dogs out. So he has a little extra rocket fuel, freshly rested dogs. They can make the team go a little faster for a little bit and rest 2 more dogs and rotate them out. Aaron Burmeister says he doesn't do that, even though pretty much everybody else does. So he's challenging Dallas this year, hey, how about you try not doing that? Because I'm pretty sure that's the secret to your success. And Dallas is like, you kidding? That's like asking this guy, Jeff King, to mush with 1 arm tied behind his back. Jeff King is a 4-time champion in that 4-timers club. He is the best. He will tell you about it, even though he's the one who fell for the falling asleep trick in 2008. But he's got a little bit of an attitude and a little bit of an ego, but you know what? 4-time champion, he has earned it. If you visit him, you can visit him in the summertime. You can visit him and his dogs at Husky Homestead in Denali National Park. You have to take a shuttle to his property, but once you get there, the second you step off the shuttle, you will be handed a puppy. And that's how he socializes his dogs. My high school biology teacher went right before the pandemic, and she sent me so many pictures of her and her daughter holding puppies. They had a blast. Mitch Seavey, like I said, I'm this guy's good luck charm. Where's my free plane ride? Where's my, seat next to him at this gala event coming up? 2004, 13, 17 champion. He was kind of a surprise to win in 2013. Everybody thought Ali Zirkle was going to win. She's a fan favorite, but Mitch Seavey came up to win it. And by the time 2017 rolled around, everybody loved the Mitch and Dallas father-son rivalry. It was a lot of fun. He took a break last year to experiment with what retirement looks like. He lent Dallas some of his dogs, so when Mitch returns to the race next month, his Iditarod team will include some champion dogs. Wade Mars is a top 5 finisher, and he is just a fan favorite for his can-do attitude. He's actually not running the Iditarod this year, but that's because he moved to Wisconsin, and he just took part in a 300-mile race over the weekend out of Duluth, Minnesota, called the Bear Grease, and he got 3rd place, his first attempt. Wow. So I hope he comes back to the Iditarod because I see only good things for him. Oh yeah, I gave Mitch a high five in Willow in 2013. He was the only musher I gave a high five to at the official restart. So in 2017 at the banquet, I told him about that, and I said, hey, we're not going to be able to make it to Fairbanks on Monday. He said, well, why don't you give me my high five now? So my husband got that picture, and just over a week later, he won. So I don't know where my phone call is. Matt Failer, OHIO, from Mansfield, OSU alumnus. Cusco 300, that is another mid-distance race. That one is out of Bethel, Alaska. He won in 2019. This year, he got 2nd place in that race. And he learned how to mush from Martin Boozer, the 4-time champion. If you want to root for him and support him, you can go to 17thdog.com. If you want me to, I can repeat that. You can come up and talk to me about that after I'm done. Jessie Royer. If we get another woman winning anytime soon, I want it to be her. She is absolutely amazing. She's taking a break. She owns a horse ranch in Montana. She's very quiet. She's very subdued, but you know what? She knows her dogs. She understands her animals, and she has so many animals to the point where in 2017, she didn't drop a single dog. She didn't leave a single dog with a veterinarian at all. Her dogs finished all in perfect health together at the finish line. That doesn't always happen. But she is extremely impressive as a dog person and someone who understands how to race and how to care for her dogs. Pete Kaiser won in 2019. He is now a 6-time champion of the Cusco 300, that race that I mentioned Matt Failer took part in. Pete Kaiser is actually from Bethel, where the Cusco 300 takes place. When he won the Iditarod, pretty much the entire town of Bethel, which is way out in western Alaska, the entire town came to greet him at the finish line. When he came home, you remember in 2016 when we gave the calves their giant welcome home parade? That's basically what Pete got, just Alaskan variety. Paul Gebhardt, he signed up, but then he decided not to. He was a top contender back in the late 2000s. When Lance Mackey was winning, Paul Gebhardt was usually right behind him, giving him a run for his money. He is taking a break, I believe, because he is still dealing with cancer at the moment, so I wish him nothing but the best because I would like to see him come back and show up some of these new people. Dallas Seavey, there's me with the champion, 5-time champion, tied for winningest musher in the Iditarod. In 2018, he actually went to race a 1,000-mile race in Norway. His first attempt, he got 3rd place. Wow, he is amazing. He sees himself not just as the dog's best friend, but also as their coach. He understands that the purpose of this sport is to help the dogs achieve their biological potential. What the Iditarod does and what Dallas shows, the Iditarod gives the dogs the space to do what they love. And the musher is the one who gives them the tools to be able to do that safely. And Dallas, do I think he's going to win this year? Yes, I do. Looking back at history, Susan Butcher, she is in that 4-timers club. You mentioned Susan Butcher up in Alaska, and people have a certain reverence for her. If not for Susan Butcher, nobody here would know what the Iditarod is. She is the one who made the race what it is. She made people aware of it. She turned mushing from a hobby into a career, something you can revolve your entire life around and make a living off of. She never knew the meaning of the word quit, which is how she became the second woman to win, the first woman to get 4 wins under her belts before she retired in the early 90s to raise a family. She sadly passed away of leukemia in 2006, but one of her daughters ran the Copper Basin 300, which is a mid-distance race out of Glen Allen, Alaska. Her daughter finished that race about 2-3 weeks ago. So her legacy is carrying on, and I'm excited to see what her daughter does in the future. Oh, this one hurt to put in the history section. Allie Zirkle, she and her husband, Alan Moore, have retired as of last year. Allie won 2nd place in the Iditarod 3 times in a row. She is a fan favorite. Everybody loved her. When she started climbing the ladder on the Iditarod and improving, people thought she was going to be the next Susan Butcher. She retired last year. She announced it in February, and she even said, I've never had to drop out of a single race. Well, on day 2 of last year's race, she hit a tree and got a concussion or 2 and a broken collarbone. So her last race was the one that she had to drop out of, and she has since made a full recovery, and she and her husband still take care of their dogs. They just don't race them anymore. Alan Moore, her husband, is a 3-time champion of the Yukon Quest, which is that 1,000-mile international race between Alaska and Canada I mentioned. Because of the virus closing the border, that race is cut into 2 pieces. So it's taking place right now, but just on separate sides of the border. If you want to learn more about Allie, there is an episode of this show called Losers on Netflix. She has her own episode, and she talks about why she actually doesn't mind being called a loser in an Iditarod context. She is very proud of her 2nd place finishes. Dick Mackey won in 1978 by 1 second. And since that was only the 5th race, this win actually changed, forced them to actually name what a win is. Because when Dick Mackey crossed the finish line, it was just his dogs that crossed the finish line. The guy behind him, Rick Swenson, the now 5-time champion, he and his dogs and his sled crossed the finish line. So the judges had to decide, is a win a dog crossing the finish line or the musher and his sled? Well, they decided this is a sled dog race. So of course the dog crossing the finish line, that would make the most sense to constitute as a win. So that kind of changed the rules a little bit, or created the rules. His son, Lance Mackey, probably the greatest the sport will ever know. He won in 2007, 8, 9, and 10 as a throat cancer survivor. And again, he won the Yukon Quest 4 years in a row, 2005, 6, 7, and 8. So 2 of those years overlapped. You can check him out in the documentary, The Great Alone. I don't think it's on Netflix anymore, but I do think it's on Amazon Prime. Amazing documentary showing his journey through cancer and other struggles in his life. He actually worked on one of those crabbing ships you see on Deadliest Catch kind of thing. He is taking a break this year because unfortunately his cancer has returned. And over the years, the after effects of radiology and chemotherapy, he has Raynaud's disease, which is not something you want to have when racing the Iditarod. Raynaud's disease is when cold weather affects your hands and it makes your blood vessels shrink up. So he loses essentially all function in his hands when they get too cold. So I think he has a heated handlebar, but that'll be when he comes back, once he makes a full recovery again from cancer, because he's going to beat this thing again, and I wish him all the best. Hobo Jim was not a musher, but he was a character in the Iditarod. Everybody knew who this guy was. He wrote a song in 1985 called the Iditarod Trail Song, and every school kid in Alaska knows this song when they're following the race. He was Alaska's balladeer. He wrote songs about the spirit of Alaskans, about the spirit of the natives, and he sadly passed away of cancer about 3 weeks after being diagnosed with it last October. So it was very sudden, and the times that I went to the banquet where all the mushers draw their starting number, he was always the main entertainment. So he's not going to be there anymore. So when I go there next month, it's going to feel really different and kind of empty. This is just a little joke I made. When you're an armchair musher like me, when you follow the race online, I think I look pretty peaceful and happy, but if you ask my husband, I'm the guy on the right. Just a little crazed, constantly online, constantly checking the map. I set like I only set 6 or 7 alarms last year to catch the winner across the finish line, but you know, that's normal, right? Now's the time for any questions you might have. Does anybody have any questions?
Years ago, the Iditarod was televised, and now how can we watch it now?
Yes, great question. So, unfortunately, it is not free, but that's actually a Hobo Jim song. You can follow the Iditarod by becoming an insider on Iditarod.com. I am not being paid by the Iditarod to advertise this, but they are a nonprofit. It is $40 per year to be an insider. If you become an insider, you can get live GPS tracking throughout the entire race. You can know where everybody is at all times. You can get live video feeds of the starting line, finish line, and they have stationary cameras at all the checkpoints. Because like I said, last year, I just sat and watched somebody wait for banana bread for literally 20 minutes. You can see some cool stuff. You see people come into checkpoints throughout the entire race. You get videos later. They have their own sports reporter kind of people. They have commentators. You get all sorts of cool stuff. I think you can even live stream the banquet that I'm going to on Thursday before the race. So it's a lot of fun. Also, another tip, if you want to become an armchair musher like me, use social media. I know sometimes it's a hassle to look stuff up, but if you really connect with a musher that you see in the trail, if you really like them, a lot of these mushers have social media pages and they update them daily, and the people who work for them will share their progress in the race. I know Brent Sass, the one I mentioned who lives way out in the middle of nowhere, he puts videos up of him training his dogs pretty much daily, but just not right now because he's racing the Yukon Quest. He'll probably come in for a win in a day or two. I'm excited. So yeah, social media, Iditarod.com. Becoming an insider is really easy. Just $40 a year, and the money goes towards the organization. They're furthering their cause to increase dog care around the world. This race created a veterinary need. So when they realized, hey, we need a better veterinary care to take care of these dogs out on the trail, so it kind of forced veterinary care to improve, and now it can improve the lives of dogs all around the world. So that's where the money goes, towards the Iditarod Trail Committee, and you get all sorts of cool stuff throughout the entire race. So yeah, and you can also follow me on Facebook. I will be documenting my entire trip. You can look me up as Iditarod Trail Talks on Facebook. So yeah, any other questions?
Is there any other prize money besides the first place?
Second place gets, I think, $40,000. Third place gets $30,000, and if you're in the top 20, you get a significant amount. But once you're below the top 20, you get $1,049, $1 for every mile.
So how many teams usually go? Like how many teams are there every year?
This year there are 50 teams. On average, there's probably closer to 70, but with COVID, sometimes sponsors are trying to save money, so sometimes mushers won't have the money to sign up for the race, or some people from the lower 48 won't be able to get to Alaska because the Canadian border is closed and they don't have the money to pay for a plane to move all their gear. I know one person who was supposed to be in the race last year couldn't compete because she got stopped at the Canadian border trying to drive across. So it was unfortunate, but kind of riding the COVID train as far as change goes right now, but hopefully everything smooths out over the next year or two and we can have a normal field. Did you have a question?
But he took mine.
Oh yeah, okay. Are there any other questions? All right, well, thank you all so much for coming out. If you have any other questions, come on and ask me.